Inside one of the grandest houses in the estate, Michael, an 8-year-old boy with bright eyes and quick hands, was pacing his room impatiently. He had everything a child could ever wish for: shelves stacked with expensive toys, a bed so large it could fit 3 children, and a wardrobe filled with clothes from different parts of the world. Yet none of it ever seemed enough. Michael had a habit, a bad one. Ever since he was 4, he had been taking things that did not belong to him. It started small, picking up little coins left on the table, slipping sweets into his pocket when no one was looking, taking his classmates' pencils when they weren't paying attention. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, had warned him countless times. They scolded, they pleaded, they even tried rewarding him for good behavior. But Michael never listened. Today was no different. School had ended hours ago, and instead of playing with his toys at home, Michael had something else in mind: hunt. He enjoyed walking around the estate, searching for anything valuable: coins, misplaced wristwatches, forgotten shopping bags, anything he could claim as his own. He didn't need these things, but the thrill of taking them excited him. As he reached the grand staircase, he saw Teresa, the house help, folding clothes in the living room. "Auntie Teresa, I'm going to see David," Michael lied, naming one of his classmates who lived nearby. Teresa barely looked up. "Come back before your parents return, okay?" "I will," he called, already running towards the door. The moment Michael stepped out into the estate, his heart raced with excitement. It was time to explore. He strolled past the neatly parked luxury cars and the tall high-tech fences guarding each house. But today he wanted more. His small feet carried him towards the estate gate, a place he had never gone beyond alone. The security guard stared at him curiously as he approached. "Where are you going, young master?" the guard asked. Michael grinned, his mind working fast. "My classmate's driver is waiting for me outside. I'll be back soon." The guard hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded. "Be careful." Michael stepped out of the estate, his heart pounding. He had entered a new world. Outside the estate, things looked different. The road was dusty, and the air smelled of roasting corn and fried plantain from the street vendors nearby. Cars honked impatiently, and pedestrians moved quickly. Michael walked further, his eyes scanning the ground. He hoped to find something valuable. Then he saw it. A few meters ahead, beneath the shade of an old almond tree, was a fancy glass bowl. Inside the bowl was money, neatly arranged crisp naira notes, and beside the money, there were colorful candies and chocolates. Michael froze, his heart leaped. His fingers twitched with excitement. Who would leave such treasures on the roadside? He looked around, scanning the area. No one was nearby. Maybe someone forgot it. Maybe it was a gift waiting for him. Maybe it was just his lucky day. He stepped closer. The breeze whispered through the trees, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. The city noise seemed to fade. Everything around him became still. He reached out his hand. His small fingers touched the bowl. A blinding flash of light exploded before his eyes. Michael's body shook violently as a strange, cold sensation crawled over his skin. His bones twisted, his fingers shrank, his legs bent backward. His mouth opened to scream, but all that came out was, "Mihi!" The world tilted. The trees suddenly looked taller, the road stretched wider, and the cars appeared like giants. Michael's mind was sharp, but something was terribly wrong. He tried to take a step. His legs felt strange. He looked down and saw brown hooves. Hooves. His hands were gone. His fingers were gone. His heart slammed against his chest. He tried to scream, but again all that came out was, "Me." Michael was no longer a boy. He was a goat. For an hour, the young brown goat stood beneath the almond tree, trembling in confusion. People passed by, but no one paid attention. Far away, inside the estate, Michael's parents had just returned home. Mr. Okafor removed his tie and called for Teresa. "Where is Michael?" "He went to see David," Teresa replied casually. Mrs. Okafor frowned. David's mother just called me. Michael isn't there. A chill ran through Mr. Okafor's spine. He grabbed his car keys. Call the security. We need to find him. Minutes later they were out on the streets, searching. They asked the estate security. Did you see our son leave? Yes, the guard said. He said he was meeting his classmate outside the gate. Fear settled in Michael's mother's heart. He went outside the estate. Alone. Immediately they began searching. Michael watched in horror as his parents walked past him. They were so close, yet they didn't recognize him. Me, he cried desperately. His mother paused, glancing at the goat. This goat keeps making noise, she murmured. But her husband grabbed her hand. Forget the goat. We need to find our son. They walked away. Michael felt a deep, helpless fear settle inside him. He was right there. But no one knew. For the first time in his life, Michael wished he had listened to his parents. For the first time, he regretted taking what was not his. The sun had set, and the once bright streets of the city were now bathed in golden streetlights. The night air carried the distant hum of cars, laughter from open balconies, and the occasional barking of dogs. But amid all these familiar sounds, one noise remained unheard, unnoticed. Me. Michael, the boy who had been turned into a goat, stood under the same almond tree, watching in despair as the world moved on without realizing he was missing. He had screamed, cried, and even tried to chase after his parents as they passed by earlier, but they had only spared him a single, uninterested glance. They had no idea their missing son was standing right in front of them. Now he watched as they disappeared down the road, their voices frantic, their steps urgent. His mother was weeping. His father was barking orders at the estate security and dialing phone numbers. Michael tried again, running after them on his shaky goat legs. Me. Nothing. No one understood. The streetlights flickered above him, casting eerie shadows on the road. He was cold, hungry, tired, and worst of all, alone. Back in the estate, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor's mansion was in chaos. The house help, the security men, the neighbors. Everyone was gathered, trying to figure out where Michael could have gone. He said he was going to David's house, Teresa repeated, her hands trembling. But he never got there. Michael's mother cried, clutching her chest. Mr. Okafor, usually a calm and collected businessman, was pacing furiously. His phone pressed to his ear. Inspector, please. My son is missing. He left the estate this afternoon, and we haven't seen him since. We need police officers on this case now. Michael's younger sister, Omalicha, sat quietly on the couch, clutching one of Michael's toys. Michael never stays out this late, she whispered. Something is wrong. Everyone knew it. Something was terribly wrong. Minutes later, the police arrived. Meanwhile, a witness remained silent. While Michael's parents were organizing a search party, one man knew what had happened, but he was too afraid to speak. His name was Papa Jide. He was a carpenter, working on the roof of an unfinished building not far from where Michael had touched the mysterious bowl. From his high position he had seen everything. He had watched as the young boy walked towards the bowl, his eyes shining with greed. He had seen the boy reach out, his fingers brushing against the glass. And then the impossible happened. Bright flash, a gust of wind, and in the place where a boy once stood, there was only a small brown goat. Papa Jide had nearly fallen off the roof in shock. He had rubbed his eyes, blinked hard, even slapped his own face. But no matter how many times he looked, the truth remained. The boy had turned into a goat. Papa Jide had climbed down from the building, his heart pounding. What had he just witnessed? Was it witchcraft? Curse? He had heard stories, tales of people disappearing, of spirits lurking in shadows, of punishments for those who took what was not theirs. But he had never, in his 52 years on Earth, seen anything like this. He wanted to tell someone. He wanted to run to the estate, bang on the gate, and scream, "Your son is here." He's the goat. But would anyone believe him? Would they call him crazy? Would they laugh at him and say he was drinking too much palm wine? Papa Jide hesitated. By the time he gathered the courage to act, it was too late. Michael's parents and the police had moved further away, searching the streets and asking strangers if they had seen a lost boy. Night had fallen. The streetlights cast long shadows across the road. Michael, the little goat, stood near the tree, shivering in the cold. His body was tired. His tiny stomach ached. He had never been outside alone this long before. He had never been this helpless. His legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed on the cold pavement. For the first time in his life, Michael felt true regret. He wished he had listened to his parents. He wished he had never taken things that weren't his. He wished he could just go home. Tears pricked his eyes, but goats couldn't cry. So he simply lay there, silent and defeated. Then footsteps. Someone was approaching. Michael lifted his head. A dark silhouette loomed over him. Papa Jide. The old man stared down at the little goat for a long moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he bent down and gently lifted him into his arms. "Don't worry, boy," he murmured. "I won't leave you here." And with that, he carried Michael away, disappearing into the shadows. Papa Jide walked carefully, holding the small brown goat in his arms. Michael was too weak to struggle, too confused to resist. He simply lay still, his tiny body trembling. The old man's house was a small but tidy one-room apartment at the back of a compound filled with tenants. He entered quietly, locked the door behind him, and set the goat down on a worn-out rug in the corner. Michael looked around with wide eyes. The room smelled of sawdust and varnish, evidence of Papa Jide's work as a carpenter. Wooden carvings and unfinished furniture lined the walls, and a small kerosene lamp flickered on a stool. The old man sighed heavily, running a hand over his bald head. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered to himself. Michael watched him, his heart filled with fear. Would he ever turn back into a boy? Would he be stuck as a goat forever? He wanted to cry, but goats couldn't cry. He wanted to speak, to beg for help, but only a weak meh escaped his lips. Papa Jide turned and looked at him, his face full of worry. "If I tell people what I saw, they will think I am mad." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "But if I don't do anything, this poor child might be lost forever." He thought of the Okafors. He had seen them many times. A rich family, always busy, always in a hurry. Would they believe a poor carpenter if he told them their son had been turned into a goat? Or would they accuse him of kidnapping? The thought made him shudder. He couldn't afford to take that risk. But he also couldn't abandon the boy. The police investigation. Meanwhile, at the Okafor mansion, the house was in chaos. The police had arrived, and officers were taking statements from everyone. "When did you last see the boy?" One officer asked the house help, Teresa. "Around 4 in the afternoon," she sniffled. "He said he was going to visit his classmate, David. But he never arrived there," the officer said, writing in his notebook. Michael's mother was pacing, her face streaked with tears. "Officer, please, do something. My son is only 8 years old. He must be so scared." "We are doing everything we can, madam," the officer assured her. "We've alerted all patrol units. We'll find him." But even as he spoke, there was doubt in his eyes. No kidnappers had called for ransom. No witnesses had seen anything unusual. It was as if Michael had simply disappeared. Back in his little room, Papa Jide sat in deep thought. The goat, Michael, lay curled up on the rug, exhausted. The old man knew he couldn't keep the boy hidden forever. He had to do something. Then an idea struck him. Police. If he went to the police and reported what he had seen, maybe, just maybe, they would believe him. He looked at Michael one last time, sighed, and grabbed his old faded cap. Then he stepped outside into the night, heading toward the nearest police station. The station was not too far, A small but busy building with flickering tube lights and officers moving in and out. Papa Gide walked in hesitantly, clutching his cap. A young officer behind the desk looked up. "Yes. How can we help you?" Papa Gide licked his dry lips. I have information about the missing boy." The officer immediately straightened. "What do you know?" Papa Gide took a deep breath. "I saw him this afternoon. I saw what happened to him." "Where?" the officer asked urgently. Papa Gide hesitated. He knew what he was about to say would sound unbelievable, but he had to try. "I saw him outside the estate, near the big almond tree," he said carefully. "There was a strange bowl on the ground. He tried to take it and then he disappeared." The officer frowned. "Disappeared?" Papa Gide swallowed. "No, not disappeared. He changed." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Changed into what?" Papa Gide's voice was barely a whisper. "A goat." Silence filled the station. The officer blinked. Then he burst into laughter. "Old man, do you think we're here to listen to folk tales? A boy turned into a goat. Are you drunk?" "I swear. I saw it with my own eyes." Papa Gide insisted. "Get out of here before I arrest you for wasting police time," the officer snapped. Papa Gide clenched his fists. He knew this would happen. But then, another officer, an older man with a sharp gaze, stepped forward. "Wait." He studied Papa Gide carefully. "Describe the boy you saw." Papa Gide did. He described Michael exactly. His school uniform, his backpack, his sneakers. The officer exchanged glances with his colleague. That was exactly how Michael had been dressed when he went missing. "Bring in the sketch artist," the senior officer ordered. 30 minutes later, a sketch artist sat across from Papa Gide, drawing based on his description. When the picture was finished, the officers compared it to Michael's missing person report. The resemblance was unmistakable. One officer exhaled deeply. "This is crazy, but what if he's telling the truth?" The senior officer nodded slowly. "Call the parents." At the Okafor mansion, the phone rang. Michael's father answered. "Hello. Mr. Okafor, we need you and your wife to come to the station immediately. We may have a lead on your son's whereabouts." Hope flared in Mr. Okafor's chest. "We're on our way." They rushed to the police station, arriving breathless, fear and hope battling on their faces. Papa Gide was still there, waiting nervously. When they entered, the officers handed them the sketch. Michael's mother gasped. "This is my son," she whispered. The officer took a deep breath. "Sir, madam. The man who gave us this description claims that your son was transformed into a goat." The room fell into stunned silence. Michael's father stared at the officer, his mouth slightly open. What kind of nonsense? But his wife, eyes filled with terror, grabbed his arm. "Wait." She turned to Papa Gide. "Where is the goat now?" Papa Gide hesitated, then said, "At my house." Michael's mother grabbed the officer's hands. "Please take us there." Without another word, everyone rushed out into the police cars and sped toward Papa Gide's home. Papa Gide unlocked his door and stepped aside. Michael's parents rushed in and froze. There, lying on the rug, staring at them with sad, human-like eyes, was the small brown goat. Michael's mother dropped to her knees, her hand over her mouth. Tears poured down her cheeks. "Michael," she whispered. The goat let out a weak bleat. A sob. Mr. Okafor swallowed hard, his hands shaking. The police officers stood still, stunned beyond words. Something unnatural had happened. The air inside Papa Gide's small room was heavy with tension. Michael's mother was on her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Michael, my son," she cried, reaching out to touch the small brown goat. The animal flinched at her touch, as if trapped between two worlds. Michael wanted to speak, to tell his mother he was here, but all that came out was another weak bleat. "Me." Michael's father stood frozen, his face pale. He had always been a logical man, a man who did not believe in superstition or wild stories. But now he was staring at the impossible. Their son had turned into a goat. One of the officers coughed awkwardly. "Mr. Okafor. Madam Okafor. What do you want us to do?" Michael's mother clutched her chest. "Do? What do you mean, what do we want you to do? My son is a goat. We need to turn him back." Mr. Okafor shook his head. "This is madness. Maybe we are all just imagining things. Maybe this is just an ordinary goat, and we are losing our minds because of grief." "Sir," one of the officers whispered, "look at his eyes." Mr. Okafor hesitated. Then slowly he turned to look. And there it was, a spark of human intelligence deep inside the goat's brown eyes. Michael was there. Prap. Fear gripped Mr. Okafor's heart. What do we do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then Papa Jide cleared his throat. "I know someone," the old carpenter said. "Who?" Michael's mother asked desperately. "My pastor. Pastor Solomon. He has helped people in situations that were not normal." A strange silence filled the room. Michael's parents exchanged glances. They were rich people. They had never needed to rely on pastors or prophets. But now they were powerless. And if there was even a small chance of saving their son, they had to take it. "Call him," Michael's mother whispered. Pastor Solomon arrived within the hour. He was a tall, serious-looking man dressed in a simple white robe, with a Bible tucked under his arm. As soon as he stepped into the room, his expression darkened. "There is something evil here," he murmured. "Something that should not be." Michael's mother clutched his hands. "Pastor, please. That goat is my son. We need to bring him back." The pastor nodded. "We will pray." He set down his Bible and brought out a small bottle of anointing oil. Then he began. "Every power that has stolen the destiny of this child, release him now." The moment the pastor's voice rose in authority, the small brown goat jerked violently. Michael felt it. Something was fighting inside him. He had never been so afraid. The pastor poured a few drops of oil onto the goat's forehead and shouted, "Fire!" The room shook. Michael's mother screamed as the goat let out a loud, piercing bleat. Michael's vision blurred. His head spun. Somewhere in the darkness he saw a figure. A tall, shadowy man with glowing red eyes. "You are mine now," the shadow growled. "No!" Michael wanted to scream. A bright light blazed from the pastor's hands. The shadow shrieked. The pastor continued, his voice like thunder. "Every spirit that has turned this child into something he is not, be destroyed." The goat collapsed, trembling violently. The entire house shook. Then suddenly, the shaking stopped, and so did the goat. Silence. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. The goat began to change. Its fur retracted, its limbs stretched, its face shifted. Before everyone's eyes, the small brown goat slowly turned back into a boy. Michael collapsed on the rug, gasping for air. His mother screamed in joy and ran to him. "Michael! My son! My son!" She pulled him into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael was shaking all over. His father fell to his knees, his face pale with shock. It's really him," he whispered. Pastor Solomon wiped his forehead. "It is done." Michael's mother held him tightly, rocking him. "My baby. My baby." Michael clung to her. He was back. But he would never forget what had happened. Regret and redemption. The police, stunned beyond words, quietly stepped out. Papa Jide, who had been watching the entire scene, whispered a thank you to God. Michael sat up slowly. His throat was dry. His hands were still trembling. His mother touched his face gently. "Michael, what happened?" Tears welled up in his eyes. "Mummy, I'm sorry," he whispered. His father frowned. "Sorry. Sorry for what?" Michael sniffled. "I saw a bowl of money and sweets on the ground. I wanted to take it. Then everything went dark." His mother covered her mouth. Michael sobbed. I was greedy. I took things that weren't mine. I didn't listen to you and Daddy. I thought I could do whatever I wanted. He looked down at his hands, still shaking. But I was wrong. He buried his face in his mother's chest. I will never take anything that doesn't belong to me again. Never, never, never. His parents held him tightly. Michael had learned his lesson in the hardest way possible. And now he would never forget it. But the real question remained. Who had placed that bowl there? And what exactly had turned him into a goat? The Okafor mansion was silent that evening. Michael lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Even though he was back home safe and sound, he couldn't sleep. His mother had given him a warm bath. His father had bought him his favorite meal. His parents had promised to keep him close from now on. But nothing could erase the terror he had felt. The cold wind under the almond tree. The strange bowl filled with money and sweets. The moment his hands touched it, and he ceased to be human. Michael shivered under his blanket. Something was wrong. Who had placed that bowl there? And why? Michael's parents were still awake, sitting in their grand bedroom, talking in hushed voices. We have to do something, his mother said. This was not an ordinary event. Someone did this to our son. His father sighed deeply. But who? And why would anyone target an innocent child? His mother hesitated. Maybe it wasn't about Michael alone. Maybe it was a trap, for any greedy child. Her husband froze. Trap. Test. And their son had failed. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the truth sinking in. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang. They exchanged a nervous glance. It was too late for visitors. Who could that be? His father murmured, standing up cautiously. Michael's mother followed behind as he went downstairs and opened the door. Outside, standing under the dim porch light, was an old woman. She was dressed in a long, faded wrapper, with a matching headscarf tied neatly. Her face was deeply wrinkled, her eyes sharp and knowing. Michael's father frowned. Madam, how can we help you? The old woman did not smile. You do not know me, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I know what happened to your son. Michael's mother gasped. His father's grip on the doorknob tightened. Who are you? The old woman took a deep breath. Call the boy, she said. He must hear this too. A few minutes later, Michael sat in the living room, staring at the strange woman with wide eyes. Her presence made him uneasy. The lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the marble floor. The woman sighed and looked at Michael directly. Child, she said, you were not the first to touch that bowl. And you will not be the last. Michael swallowed hard. What do you mean? The woman leaned forward. That bowl was placed there as a warning, a test for greedy souls. She turned to his parents. Every few years, a spirit in this city tests the hearts of children. It leaves behind something tempting, money, food, toys. Those who ignore it and walk away go free. She turned back to Michael, her eyes dark and serious. But those who take what is not theirs are punished. Michael trembled. But why? The woman sighed. Because greed is a curse. And sometimes, people must learn their lesson the hard way. Michael's father shook his head in disbelief. This is madness, he said. How can something so evil exist? How can someone punish an innocent child just for making a mistake? The woman's gaze hardened. Was it really a mistake, she asked. Michael's parents stared at her. Michael looked down at his hands. The truth weighed heavy on him. He had been stealing for years. Taking money from the floor. Taking things from his classmates. Ignoring his parents' warnings. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a habit. And it had nearly destroyed him. The woman slowly stood up. Your son was lucky, she said. Most never return. Michael shuddered. His mother clutched him protectively. The woman walked to the door, then paused. Tell him, she said, to warn others. And with that, she disappeared into the night. The next morning, Michael woke up feeling different. He stepped out of his room and walked around the house, taking everything in. The expensive furniture, the sparkling chandeliers, the shelves lined with toys and books. He had everything, yet he had still wanted more. But not anymore. Never again. Michael picked up a pen and a notebook. Then slowly he wrote, "Greed can turn you into something you don't want to be. Be content. Be honest. Or you might lose yourself forever." From that day on, Michael was never the same. He became kind. He became giving. He became a boy with a lesson to teach. And whenever he walked past the big almond tree near the estate, he never looked down. 'Cause some things are better left untouched.